Hello everybody, thank you for clicking on this video in which I'm going to try to explain to you what's all the hype about regarding the ethics ball. Why is it so amazing and why everybody should want to participate in it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to have a little bit of a slideshow. We're going to talk about some of the main elements having to do with the ethics ball. And then I'm going to show you where to find some resources that you might need as you organize or supervise a team that will participate in the ethics ball. And yeah, eventually I'll just talk about this year's event, how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and then that should be enough information. All right, so let's get started. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the history of the ethics ball. So the ethics ball is something that started in 1993 at the collegial level in the United States, to be more specific, at the University of Chicago. And since then, it's grown a lot. Now there are many different variations on different topics that are related to ethics, like bioethics, business ethics, engineering ethics, and all those disciplines that have something to do with ethics, which is, well, probably most of them, but anyway. So all of those have their own ethics ball now. At the high school level, it started in 2012. Now it's run in the US under the tutelage of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So in its short 7 years of existence, it has grown from nothing to an event that now involves more than 4,000 students from 500 schools in 28 states. So this is an incredible growth, and this is because we think, the product is actually quite good. So we brought it in Canada in 2015. It started in Manitoba, actually. It was sponsored by the Manitoba Association for Rights and Liberties. So it's grown quite well there also. Now it involves, if I remember well, the last count was 22 teams, 16 teams in English and 6 teams in French. One of the features of the Canadian Ethics Bowl is that it was designed to be organized in both languages from the get-go. Anyway, so it started in Manitoba, and last year BC was the first province in Canada outside of Manitoba to organize a regional championship, which we organized at SFU. As a result, there were 2 different provinces. So the first national was organized in Winnipeg, and it was hosted by the Canadian Museum for Rights, for Human Rights. Yeah. This year, in 2019-2020, we hope to have other provincials in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, which would really start to make it look like a truly national event. So last year, we had the first regional in British Columbia, held at SFU Burnaby campus. 5 schools participated, as you see here. We had 3 schools from the Vancouver School District, Ideal Mini, Prince of Wales, and Van Tech. 1 from Surrey, Princess Margaret, and 1 from Delta, Sands. Hopefully this year we can expand a little bit, cover more school districts, maybe go on the island, maybe a little bit in the BC interior. We expect between 10 and 20 teams. It might go as high as 25, depending on how much enthusiasm there is about it. So later on, I'm going to mention a website for you, and you're going to be able to check out the report, the event report for last year's event. So have a look at that. I just want to show you a few photos because, well, photos are so nice. So as you see here, we have 2 teams. We have Sands Secondary And here we have Princess Margaret. The person in the middle there is a moderator. And here we have a slate of 3 judges, and I'm going to explain to you as we go what those people are doing. Here we have members of the public, including coaches. One is here, and the other one is, where is he? Oh, hiding here. That is. All right. So that was from round 1. Here's one from round 2. In this one, we see Ideal Mini School versus Van Tech Secondary. Occasionally during the day, the teams might have a little bit of a break, so they have rooms available in which they can, collect their thoughts together to prepare for the next round. Very importantly, for hungry teenagers, we provide free pizza to make sure that their glucose level doesn't go too low. Here actually it is the 2 finalist teams, Sands, which was the winning team, and in the background here, Ideal Mini School, which was runner-up. Both teams qualified to go to the national in Winnipeg, and this was on the eve of the competition in Winnipeg when we all gathered in a coffee shop, to fraternize a little bit. That was an extremely nice thing. All right. So what's the big deal with the Ethics Bowl? Well, the most important thing about the Ethics Bowl is that it sees itself, it is conceived as an alternative to traditional debates. Now, there are very good reasons to participate in traditional debates. There are also some disadvantages in participating. So, what are some of the benefits and shortcomings? I invite you to read a little article in the New York Times that recently appeared that discusses some of the good things and some of the bad things. That's essentially based on that. We all know that traditional debates develop oratory skills. They can develop the self-confidence of the students. The fact that the positions that students have to argue for are imposed has a good side, which is it might force them to argue for something which isn't the view that they would most naturally endorse. And also it develops persuasion skills. As parents who have kids in debate teams will tell you, they always argue. Now, there are also, let's say, more negative side to debates. And a lot of them have to do with the attitudes that it cultivates in the participants. On the one hand, it's purely adversarial, so the 2 teams have to maintain opposite views. They're not really allowed to agree. May lead to overconfidence because there's a lot of rhetoric, and sometimes it goes beyond what the quality of the arguments justifies. As a result, it might strengthen a tendency to reason in a biased way, and the preponderance of rhetorical flurries, something like that, makes it such that sometimes critical thinking really is on the back burner. So, as we see, there are good things, there are bad things. The way the Ethics Bowl was designed was to get all the good things and none of the bad things. So, I think it worked pretty well. Now, as you see from the tagline, creating community through critical conversation, the mindset is very much different than a traditional debate, which is purely oppositional or adversarial. An Ethics Bowl is described as follows. So there's a collaborative and a competitive element to this event. The themes that students will argue about are going to be ethically related. Why ethically related themes? Well, just because they are very complex and therefore quite conducive to making students think really hard about complicated situation. Um, Now, students will have to themselves imagine and criticize and compare bold argumentative strategies. One thing that is very important is that the teams do not have to disagree with each other necessarily, and they are even allowed to amend their views in the face of good arguments. So this is already in stark contrast with the traditional debate. Uh, but on top of that, there are going to be judges, and those judges are allowed to ask questions to the participants so that they clarify their views or perhaps, correct mistaken claims and things like that. So this is basically the description for the Ethics Bowl. Now, there's a number of places where you can find resources for this event. Let me just show you a few of those. So on the one hand, let me see how my window is working. Okay, so on the one hand, you're gonna have that's the top of the page that you have. That's the ethicsbowl.ca webpage. If you if you scroll down, it's going to tell you what's an ethics bowl, etc., etc. So if you're interested in organizing one, you can click on that link, and you're going to see there's a guide. Where is it? The entire document, which is the guide for educators, 56 pages, which you can download right there. There's a shorter version that I recommend at first here, how to organize an ethics bowl. And it's an 8-page document, short and sweet. So that would be a nice place to start. And here there are some tips about how to choose the students that will be part of the team. And here we have a little bit more information about what criteria are being used in an ethics bowl. So this is an important website. All the various ethics bowl competitions are based on the standards that are adopted by the national consortium. So that should always be a reference. However, specifically for BC, since SFU is organizing the Ethics Bowl in British Columbia, we have made a little page so you can see there's a description of it both in French and in English. There's information about this year's Ethics Bowl, when it's going to happen. You see it's going to be on February 15, 2020. There is a number of elements containing detail and information. So there's a link to send you back to the ethicsbowl.ca website. There's a little video introducing the Ethics Bowl that we're going to have a look at very soon. And there's also a paper that I wrote recently explaining why in the context of BC it's particularly important to have something like the Ethics Bowl. Now we have a curriculum that is basically entirely focused on the development of core competencies. And often people are not sure how to develop those core competencies. And there are 6 of them, how to develop them in a harmonious manner. So basically, that's a short little paper that discusses that. There's the event report for last year's event. Okay, that's the New York Times article that I was mentioning. And here there's a draft of a guide for regional organizers. That shouldn't be of concern to you. So as you see, there's a lot of information available already. That SFU webpage is going to be sporadically updated with new information, so I very much encourage you to have a look at it. But for now, I would like to just show you a little introductory video about the ethics ball. So it's on Vimeo here. Let's see if we can get it started.
Almost 5,000 students across the country have spent the year thinking hard together about complex moral issues.
The fun really is in when the other team says something that's completely unexpected and you're like, whoa, what do we do with that?
Are the judges ready?
It's basically an annual program where we discuss moral and political philosophical questions with high school students.
One team presents, the other team comments. They're supposed to critically engage with what the team presented. The cases are about things they have to grapple with, whether they study ethics or not.
Well, we thought you brought up a really good point that when you're participating in something, you may be consenting to criticism. We do think that the method of criticism and how criticism is carried out is very important.
It's more of a discussion. It's more of you trying to put things together rather than take things apart.
Three criteria they're scored on, though, are the clarity and sort of logic of their presentation. Did they talk about the central moral dimensions? So did they talk about why the case is hard, right? What makes it a moral dilemma? And then were they able to show sort of sensitivity and respect to the other side, to someone who disagreed with whatever position they took?
Thank you for listening to us. We look forward to having a discussion with you.
Look at these cases, it's like, wow, maybe to like question my views, or like further develop the views I already have, applying them in a case, a hypothetical case. The dynamic is like really interesting.
Some prison inmates do have children or spouses who live in the outside world, who these policies that they're voting into action may affect.
And a lot of times you get to see other points of view as well, and then that can either be incorporated or just a different way to think about it.
And another great point that you brought up is, with the Electoral College, it's unfair that some states matter more and attract too much attention, but we think it's important to acknowledge that this is not inherently an Electoral College issue. If we were to switch the popular vote, the states that were receiving more attention would physically change. We would instead focus on the more populous states.
This is one of the most collaborative things I've ever done. You can never make a decision based on just your point of view through ethics bowl. You really have to take everybody's point of view and work with that.
When I'm up there presenting, I know if I'm able to say, Leo's going to have my back.
Being able to have a respectful, engaged discussion over disagreement, I think is the core value of this event.
It's like, wow, I lost and I learned something. So
Exactly. I got 10 points.
Wow, huh? Isn't that a beautiful, inspiring video? If only the quality of my slides was so great. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Anyway, let's keep going. Whoops, what is happening here? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's keep going. Now, I've already mentioned a little bit, what are differences between the ethics bowl and the traditional debate. You saw a little bit more in that video. I hope the idea is starting to be a little bit more clear. But just to emphasize it in a way that is even more striking, here I have listed a number of differences, and on each horizontal line, basically, you see the difference between, just like here, you see the difference between the traditional debate and the ethics bowl. So one's purely oppositional, the other one's collaborative, whereas the traditional debate starts with a conclusion, the ethics bowl starts with the questions, which means that it's very much inquiry-driven, that which what we want to encourage in our students. It's really solution driven. It's not just partisan argumentation. You really don't get that as much in a traditional debate. Here it's important in the ethics bowl to show that we appreciate the entire complexity of the issue, not that we are oversimplifying it. As I will explain, students get the cases that they're going to be arguing about a long time ahead before the competition, so that they can have months really to study in depth those questions, so that it's a real learning experience that they are going through. So anyway, as you see, there are many interesting differences here that are worth emphasizing. Okay. An important part of the difference between the traditional debate and the ethics bowl is that in the ethics bowl, we try to cultivate those positive attitudes that are going to help students to work together, really, to try to figure out answers to complex questions. Now, there are, of course, many ways of characterizing what those attitudes would be like. Here, I'm just pointing out one resource which you can find on the website of Facing History and Ourselves. It's the Straight A's for Facilitating Discussion about Diversity and Social Justice. And it's really basically 5 steps that you want to make sure you go through to make sure that the discussion is done in a way that is both constructive and respectful. Now, let's get to the concrete details, enough of the big picture. So each team is going to have 3 to 5 students, and you may have up to 2 alternates. That means that for each round, you're going to have at most 5 students participating, and at most at least 3. So if you have a team of 7, that means that for each given round, 2 students are going to be sitting it out. Now, it doesn't have to be the same student that sit out every round. You can change who is on the main 5 from round to round. Now, because there's not that much resource available, I mean, we're already stretched in terms of volunteers and all of that, we have to restrict it to 1 team per school. So last year, some of our participants had organized a sort of mini tournaments in their school in order to figure out which school would participate in the regional. That's your responsibility to decide how you're going to do that. But really, you can just pick 5 or 7 students and send them directly to the regional, and then there are no complications that arise from this whole thing. Now, the event is limited to public schools, so if you are in an independent or private school, unfortunately, the event is not available for you. The setup of the room is interesting. So it's going to be set up as you see right here. So you're going to have the moderator, you're going to have the team A right here, you're going to have your team B right here. As you see, the tables are not facing each other, so that it gives the impression that the students are butting heads with each other. Rather, they are in a V formation, and they are facing the judges and the audience to make it quite clear that it's an inclusive conversation with more than those 2 teams. It also is including the judges and the audience. Now, each round is going to proceed as follows. So for each round, two cases are going to be discussed. Each of the 2 teams is going to lead on exactly one of those 2 cases and will be the responding team for the other case. So the 2 teams never lead for the same case, which is again a way of ensuring that they are not, butting head on that same case. So let's say first case has to do with rights and liberties, something like that. So the moderator is going to flip a coin. Suppose team A wins. He's going to offer team A to lead or to pass. Now, team A is going to know that the first case of that round is rights and liberties, and is going to know that the second is, I don't know, whether superheroes present morally constructive examples to kids. I don't know. Call it the superhero case. So team A will be like, oh, we'd prefer to lead on the second case, so they might decide to pass so that they lead the second case and respond on the first one. Okay, but for now, let's suppose that team A decides to lead on that case. Uh, they're, the moderator is, after they accept to lead the case, is going to read them a particular question. They're going to have 2 minutes to confer and then 5 minutes to make their opening statement. Then the other team, the responding team, Team B, is going to have 1 minute to confer and 3 minutes to reply. And then it's going to be back to Team A, which is also going to have 1 minute to confer and 3 minutes to reply. Following that, the judges will have 2 minutes to confer to decide who is going to ask what, talk about what, and then they're going to have a 10-minute Q&A period. So the 10 minutes includes the question and the answers. And then we flip this thing and we repeat again with Team B leading for the second case. And in BC, at the end of that, we announce the winning team, which is by a majority decision. There are a few more rules that you should know about because they're very important, but check the 8-page guide that I pointed out earlier on ethicsbowl.ca. No prepared written notes are allowed. No downloading devices are allowed. Team coaches are not allowed to interact with students during a round. Students are not allowed to talk in a round unless it's their time to confer or their time to present their view. The students must introduce themselves at the beginning of the round, and winners are determined by majority decision of the 3 judges. Now here's an example of what a case might look like. So that's an example that was used a few years ago. It's called freedom of speech or protection against hate speech. There's going to be a little paragraph introducing you to what the problem is here. There's also going to be a few links that are going to refer typically to news story that can help to contextualize the case. And what's important to understand is that though the cases are given ahead of time so that students can prepare, the exact question that they will be asked is not given ahead of time. So they will have to study the case hard and try to anticipate the kind of question that they might be asked on the day of the competition. And here's an example of that for this freedom of speech versus hate speech case that they might have been asked. I just wrote that in light of the recent events in the federal election. So here's an example. After being declined accreditation for their representative to cover the federal election debate, the right-wing outlet Rebel Media turned to the courts, which granted them access. Some federal party leaders attempted to shut down questions from this organization, and one leader simply declined to answer. So the question is, should federal party leaders be excused for shutting down questions from media outlets they consider objectionable? If so, in what circumstances? So as you see from that question, there's a sort of general ethical theme there that they're being asked about, but also they're being asked about specific circumstances, the practicality of administering those complex ethical situations. And that's going to be very, very much typical of the questions you're going to find at the Ethics Bowl. A typical competition has 5 rounds, so 2 cases per round means 10 cases. That means that in a day, they're going to spend 8 hours at the competition. Participants will be known exactly what case is going to be asked in each round, which means they can use that to prepare the roster, who will participate in which round, who studies what. Not all students have to study each of the 10 cases if there are alternates. They can rotate. And the cases for this year's regional are going to be, they are not yet, they're going to be very shortly on the SFU Ethics Bowl website. Now, the criteria of evaluation have to do very much with critical thinking, quality of argumentation, being able to show that you understand the ethical question, but also the attitudes that are embodied by the participants are subject to part of the evaluation. And when I say the attitudes, I mean things like that: mutual respect, open-mindedness, meaningful dialogue, critical conversation, active listening, flexibility, adaptability, etc., etc. So if a team comes in displaying very brash attitudes, is very common in traditional debates, well, they will be penalized for that. And we are very proud at the Ethics Bowl that we are doing that. So if you go back to the federal election debate that I was alluding to recently, people watch that and they're pulling their hair out of their head thinking, oh my God, those people are so rude and there's nothing constructive happening there. And basically that's what we're trying to avoid with the Ethics Bowl. Now, for the score sheet, for the rubric, this very specific criteria of evaluation, I will just refer you to the ethicsbowl.ca website that contains all this information. Here I'm just going to show you very quickly the sort of questions that the judges will ask themselves when it comes to determining who wins and who doesn't. So some of the questions have to do with whether the ethical question was understood, whether the key concepts were understood and applied correctly. Some has to do with using true facts, right? Not alternative facts as we know them today. Some of it has to do with the attitudes that I was describing earlier. Some has with being responsive to what the other team brings into the conversation or what the judges bring in the conversation. So that's all very important here. And for the responding team, it's about not just being yes men or yes women. That is to say, they are trying to bring in something new to deepen the conversation so that we're actually making progress towards solving that very difficult question. So they have to bring in something new. They have to also have good attitudes. They also have to show that they understand what the first team said, or at least that they are asking clarification questions if they don't. So they have basically to show that they are positively contributing to that critical conversation. Now, this year, as I mentioned, the regional is going to be on February 15th at SFU. It's a Saturday, so add that to your calendar. If you go to our website very shortly, the invitation and registration form is going to be available. Now, I very, very much strongly encourage you to get in touch with me to be added to the mailing list so that you get all the updates as they are coming. And that mailing list is really going to be the core information flow that is going to help us to have a very successful Ethics Bowl experience this year again. All right, so I just want to finish by mentioning a few things very quickly. So I did mention that paper about why the Ethics Bowl helps to develop core competencies in a very special way. So more is in the paper that I have mentioned earlier on. Here's an example of the sort of points that are elaborated in there. So you will recognize the image on the left here, which is just the image from the Ministry of Education about the 6 different core competencies. And here I list some of the important aspects of the Ethics Bowls that guarantee that the students will in fact be developing their core competencies. I want to mention also that some of the Ethics Bowl participants from last year, especially Dale from Van Tech, has been using the Ethics Bowl to structure all sorts of classroom activities, not just about ethics, but really about everything from genocide studies to history to philosophy, etc. So we could call the structure of the activity a collaborative learning challenge where we basically adapt as we want the debate structure that is in the Ethics Bowl, making sure that the students try to promote those values that we try to encourage them to have. And that makes a great pedagogical activity that can be used right there in the classroom. So some people will do things like that to try to recruit students for their team. Other people will say have a philosophy club or a debate club and pick students right from there. Other schools might have a few different teachers that are part of it, using it in their classroom, and then they might organize a sort of mini tournament to figure out who's going to be part of it on any particular year. Now, if you were here with me, I would say let's simulate around using the question that I mentioned earlier. At this point, I'm mostly just putting that slide on so that if you're watching that at your school and you would like to try it out, you have something that you can try right here, right there. You can do it with fewer people, teams of 3 instead of 5, or just 2 judges, depending on how many volunteers you manage to find. All right, so if you have feedback or if you would like to discuss some point, again, I really want you to feel free to write to me. I normally manage to reply to all my emails within 48 hours. Sometimes there's a little bit of a bottleneck, but overall I'm pretty quick with my emails, so please do not hesitate to get in touch with me. And thank you very much for watching this little recorded version of a workshop on the ethics ball. Thank you again. Bye-bye.